The superintendent's hands were shaking as he watched the security footage for the 7th time. 3 punches, 47 seconds, 1 career destroyed forever. "How did we miss this?" he whispered to the FBI agent beside him. "How did we not know she could fight like that?" The agent paused the video at exactly 11:23 a.m., the moment Riley Matthews's right hook connected with Principal Vincent Harding's jaw, sending him crashing through the classroom doorway like a broken marionette. "Sir," the agent replied, studying the freeze frame, "the real question isn't how you missed her boxing background. It's how you missed what he was doing to your female staff for 20 years. But let's go back to the beginning. Back to 3 weeks earlier, when Riley Matthews first walked through Westfield Academy's doors with nothing but a teacher's certificate and a secret that would bring down the most powerful man in Connecticut education. She thought she was applying for a simple substitute position. She had no idea she was walking into a 20-year war. Everyone thinks this story is about a teacher fighting back against harassment. They're wrong. This is the story of how one woman's 60-second decision exposed the largest educational conspiracy in state history. And it started the moment Vincent Harding made the worst mistake of his career, assuming that quiet women stay quiet forever. Before we dive deeper, ask yourself this. How many times have you witnessed something wrong and chose silence over safety? How many times have you seen someone in power abuse that power because they thought no one would fight back? Drop your thoughts below, because Riley's story isn't just about one school, it's about every workplace where predators hide behind authority. And after you hear what really happened in that classroom, you'll never look at institutional silence the same way again. 3 weeks into her contract, Riley Matthews still felt like an imposter in Westfield's marble hallways. The other teachers had Harvard degrees and family connections. She had a community college teaching certificate and calloused knuckles she kept hidden under long sleeves. At 26, she possessed the kind of gentle demeanor that made students feel safe sharing their deepest thoughts about literature. Her auburn hair always pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her cardigans soft and welcoming. What nobody knew, what she'd spent 3 years carefully hiding, was that beneath those flowing fabrics lay the lean, battle-tested physique of someone who once made grown men tap out in under 90 seconds. Westfield Academy operated by different rules than the rest of the world. The elite private school tucked away in Connecticut's wealthiest district was a universe where last names mattered more than test scores, where parking lots gleamed with luxury cars, and where a single donation could erase any transgression. The building itself commanded respect, red brick and ivy. Tall windows that caught the morning light like promises of excellence. But buildings, Riley had learned, were only as noble as the people inside them. Vincent Harding ruled this empire from his corner office on the 2nd floor. At 52, he possessed the kind of commanding presence that made parents write generous checks and school board members nod approvingly. His salt and pepper hair was always perfectly styled, his suits tailored to perfection. His handshake firm enough to convey authority without crossing into aggression. He'd been Westfield's principal for 20 years. 20 years of steadily climbing test scores, increasing endowment funds, and what he called maintaining excellence through firm leadership. What the community didn't see was how Vincent's eyes lingered on female staff members during meetings, how his office doors seemed to close more often when women were inside, how substitute teachers had a peculiar tendency to request transfers or simply disappear after brief. Unexplained conflicts with administration. The pattern was subtle, carefully crafted by someone who understood that power worked best when it operated in shadows. Riley's first encounter with Vincent came on a Tuesday afternoon in early October. She was grading papers in her temporary classroom, a sunlit space on the first floor that smelled of chalk and possibility when his voice cut through her concentration. "Ms. Matthews." Settling in, well, the authority in his tone carried the weight of someone who had never been told no. He closed the door behind him with a soft click, a sound that triggered something primal in Riley's memory, something her body recognized even if her mind chose to ignore it. "Yes, sir. The students are wonderful," she replied, not looking up from the essays spread across her desk. In her peripheral vision, she watched him move closer, his expensive leather shoes clicking against the polished floor with deliberate precision. Vincent positioned himself at the edge of her desk, his height creating a shadow that fell across her work. Dedication. I like that in a teacher, staying late to give these kids the attention they deserve. His hand rested casually on her desk, fingers drumming a slow rhythm that seemed calculated to draw her attention upward. Westfield values team players who understand the importance of cooperation. The word hung in the air between them like a question mark, loaded with implications Riley's experience had taught her to recognize. She'd heard that tone before in job interviews where qualifications mattered less than willingness to fit in performance reviews where compliance was valued over competence. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Keep your head down, kiddo. Jobs like this don't come twice." But her trainer's voice was louder. "Never let anyone corner you. Ever." "I'm committed to providing quality education," Riley said carefully, finally meeting his gaze. Vincent's smile widened, revealing teeth that were too white, too perfect. His eyes, a cold blue that reminded her of winter lakes, studied her face with the intensity of someone cataloging weaknesses. "Quality education requires trust between faculty members," he continued, his voice dropping to a more intimate register. "Trust that develops through personal connections. Perhaps we could discuss your contract renewal over dinner sometime. I know a place where we could talk privately about your future here." Riley's pen stilled in her hand. The offer wasn't really an offer. It was a test. A boundary being pushed to see how she'd respond. She'd faced this moment before the careful dance where rejecting advances risked professional consequences, but accepting them guaranteed a different kind of destruction. "I prefer to keep my professional and personal life separate, Mr. Harding." Something flickered behind Vincent's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or annoyance at having his authority questioned. He stood slowly, straightening his tie with practiced precision. "Of course, professional boundaries are important. I respect that. Truly, I do." His hand moved to her shoulder then, a gesture that appeared friendly but carried the weight of a warning. "I just hope you understand that Westfield is a close-knit community. We take care of our own here, but we also expect loyalty in return." After he left, Riley sat in the empty classroom as late afternoon sunlight painted golden rectangles across the floor. Her shoulder still felt the pressure of his hand, a reminder that some battles began long before the first punch was thrown. She pulled out her phone and made a note in her calendar, "Document everything." 3 years of hiding from conflict had taught her that some fights found you regardless of how carefully you tried to avoid them. What Riley didn't know was that 17-year-old Caleb Harrison had been documenting Westfield's culture for 2 years from his position as editor of the school newspaper. His iPhone contained 47 recordings of incidents the administration called misunderstandings. Conversations captured through cracked doors. Testimonies from classmates who trusted him with their secrets. Patterns of behavior that painted a picture no adult seemed willing to acknowledge. Today's encounter would become recording number 48. Caleb had perfected the art of being invisible, a skill that served him well as Westfield's unofficial chronicler of institutional dysfunction. At 17, he possessed the cynical wisdom of someone who'd learned early that authority figures weren't automatically trustworthy. His sandy brown hair and slight build made him forgettable to most adults, a quality he'd weaponized into becoming Westfield's most effective investigative journalist. From his position in the hallway, pretending to organize materials for tomorrow's newspaper meeting, Caleb had heard enough of Vincent's conversation with Riley to recognize the pattern. It was the same script the principal had used with Ms. Pierce last spring, the same careful escalation that had preceded her sudden departure, the same predatory patience that had driven away 3 other substitute teachers in the past 2 years. But something about Riley Matthews struck him as different. Where others had seemed uncomfortable but compliant, she'd actually said no. Where others had accepted Vincent's friendly touch, she'd pulled away. It was subtle. Any adult observer would have dismissed it as normal professional interaction, but Caleb had learned to read the microscopic signs of resistance that preceded either surrender or explosion. That evening, in his bedroom that doubled as a makeshift newsroom, Caleb reviewed his audio recording of the hallway conversation. The quality wasn't perfect voices muffled by distance and interference, but Vincent's tone was unmistakable. The pattern was there, the same escalation sequence he'd documented with mathematical precision over months of careful observation. His laptop screen displayed a spreadsheet that would have impressed FBI behavioral analysts' dates, times, targets, escalation tactics, administrative responses, and ultimate outcomes. 7 female staff members in 3 years, 5 transfers, 1 resignation under mysterious circumstances, 1 who'd simply vanished without explanation. The pattern was too consistent to be coincidental, too calculated to be innocent. Caleb's investigation had begun accidentally during his sophomore year when he'd witnessed Vincent's interaction with the art teacher, Ms. Rodriguez. What started as teenage curiosity about adult drama had evolved into something more serious when he realized the woman had filed a complaint that mysteriously disappeared, followed by her transfer to a school in a different district. The discovery that adult institutions could fail so completely had transformed his casual interest in journalism into something approaching obsession. The next morning brought a faculty meeting that would prove to be the beginning of the end for Vincent Harding's carefully constructed kingdom. Riley arrived early, settling into a chair near the back of the conference room where she could observe without being easily noticed. She'd learned this technique during her boxing days. Always position yourself where you can see the whole room. Always maintain awareness of exits and obstacles. Vincent commanded the room like a general briefing his troops, his presence filling the space with the kind of authority that made people sit straighter and speak more carefully. When he discussed maintaining standards, his eyes found Riley specifically. When he mentioned team loyalty, his smile carried a weight that felt like a warning wrapped in velvet. This year, we're implementing new policies regarding faculty conduct and student interaction, Vincent announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. It's essential that all staff members understand the importance of presenting a united front. Individual concerns should be addressed through proper channels, meaning directly to administration rather than through outside interference. Riley felt her stomach tighten as she recognized the implicit threat in his words. Translation: don't talk to anyone outside the school about problems within it. Don't seek help from external authorities. Keep Westfield's secrets within Westfield's walls. We've had issues in the past with staff members who didn't fully appreciate the delicate nature of our community relationships, Vincent continued, his gaze sweeping the room before settling momentarily on Riley. "I trust that won't be a problem going forward. After all, we're all professionals here, and professionals understand discretion." The meeting concluded with the kind of polite applause that sounded more like obligation than enthusiasm, as teachers filed out, discussing lunch plans and afternoon classes. Vincent's voice cut through the conversation. "Ms. Matthews, could you stay for a moment? I'd like to discuss your class assignments." Riley's pulse quickened, but she nodded calmly. She'd been expecting this, the follow-up to yesterday's friendly conversation, as the room emptied, leaving them alone. Vincent moved to close the door, a gesture that had become his signature move. Riley was beginning to realize. "I hope yesterday's conversation didn't give you the wrong impression," he began, leaning against the closed door in a way that blocked the exit without appearing to trap her. "I believe in direct communication. Sometimes that can seem aggressive to people who aren't used to leadership roles." "I understood perfectly," Riley replied, remaining seated but shifting slightly to face him directly. Her training had taught her that predators tested boundaries incrementally, each small violation paving the way for larger ones. "You were establishing your expectations for faculty behavior." Vincent's smile widened, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. "Exactly. And I think you'll find that faculty members who embrace those expectations tend to have much more fulfilling careers here. Tenure-track positions, recommendation letters for advanced degrees, opportunities for professional development." He moved closer, each step deliberate and measured. "Westfield takes very good care of teachers who demonstrate their commitment to our community values." Riley stood slowly, recognizing the escalation for what it was. Vincent was offering rewards, now the carrot, after yesterday's stick, but the underlying message remained the same. Compliance would be rewarded. Resistance would be punished. "Mr. Harding, I appreciate the opportunities Westfield provides, but I prefer to earn advancement through my work with students rather than through personal relationships with administrators." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Vincent's practiced smile faltered for just a moment, long enough for Riley to see the flash of genuine anger underneath. "Ms. Matthews, I'm beginning to think you may have misunderstood the nature of employment at an institution like Westfield. This isn't a public school where union protections and bureaucratic procedures shield ineffective teachers. Here, success depends on understanding and embracing our culture of excellence." He was closer now, close enough that Riley could smell his expensive cologne mixed with something else, something that reminded her of the gym locker rooms where she'd learned that some men confused physical proximity with power. "Perhaps you need more time to adjust to our expectations. I'd hate to see a promising teacher struggle because she couldn't adapt to our community standards." Before Riley could respond, the door opened to reveal Jessica Brooks, the PE teacher, with her hand on the doorknob and the expression of deliberate innocence on her face. "Vincent, sorry to interrupt, but the custodial staff needs to lock up the conference room for floor maintenance. Something about a water leak upstairs." Jessica's timing was too perfect to be coincidental, her excuse too convenient to be entirely honest. Riley felt a surge of gratitude mixed with curiosity. Was this woman an ally, or simply someone who'd learned to navigate Vincent's territory more successfully? "Of course," Vincent replied smoothly, his professional mask sliding back into place with practiced ease. "Ms. Matthews and I were just finishing our discussion about class scheduling. Thank you for letting us know, Jessica." As they left the conference room, Jessica fell into step beside Riley, her voice carefully casual. "Coffee?" "There's something you should know about staff meetings at Westfield. They're rarely just about scheduling." 10 minutes later, they sat in Riley's car in the faculty parking lot. coffee growing cold in their hands as Jessica shared what 3 years at Westfield had taught her about survival. "He's done this before," Jessica said without preamble. The last 3 substitutes, the art teacher who transferred suddenly, the guidance counselor who resigned mid-semester. "There's a pattern, and you're walking right into it." Riley studied Jessica's face, looking for signs of deception or agenda. At 29, Jessica possessed the kind of athletic confidence that came from years of competitive sports. Her blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her blue eyes direct and unwavering. She seemed genuine. But Riley had learned to be cautious about trusting people too quickly. "Why are you telling me this?" Riley asked. "Because I've been collecting evidence for months, but I needed someone willing to be visible. Someone he'd target openly instead of through whispered threats and administrative pressure." Jessica pulled out her phone, scrolling through a folder labeled Documentation. Photos, audio recordings, testimony from victims who were too scared to come forward officially. "But I need someone who won't run when things get ugly." Riley examined the evidence with growing horror and recognition. Vincent's pattern was sophisticated, calculated to avoid legal liability while maximizing psychological impact. He targeted women who were vulnerable substitutes, new hires, anyone whose position at Westfield was tenuous. He escalated slowly, testing boundaries and documenting any resistance as personality conflicts or failure to integrate with school culture. "Why haven't you taken this to the police?" Riley asked. Jessica's laugh held no humor. "Vincent Harding sits on 3 charity boards, plays golf with the police chief, and his family has donated over $500,000 to local political campaigns. Plus, look at this evidence, it's all circumstantial. Conversations that could be interpreted as friendly, touches that seem professional, career problems that appear coincidental. He's been doing this for 20 years. He knows exactly how to stay just inside legal boundaries." Riley stared at the evidence, feeling pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. This wasn't just about her. It wasn't even just about Westfield Academy. It was about institutional power protecting itself at the expense of the vulnerable. About systems designed to silence victims rather than stop predators. "There's more," Jessica continued. "Margaret Sullivan, the school board chair she's been covering for him. Every complaint gets buried. Every victim gets discredited or relocated. It's not just Vincent, it's the entire power structure. From his position 3 cars away, Caleb Harrison captured every word through the telephoto microphone he'd borrowed from the school's AV department. What had started as routine documentation was becoming something much bigger. A conspiracy that reached beyond Vincent into the very foundations of Westfield's administration. That night, Riley sat in her small apartment, staring at the boxing gloves she kept in her closet like relics from another life. They'd belonged to her father, a construction worker who'd taught her that sometimes the only way to stop a bully was to hit back harder than they hit you. He'd died in a workplace accident when she was 21, crushed by equipment that hadn't been properly maintained because reporting safety violations might have cost someone their job. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd left boxing to honor his memory, choosing education over violence, believing she could make a difference through teaching rather than fighting. But now she found herself in a situation where silence meant complicity, where staying quiet protected predators rather than victims. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Ms. Matthews, this is Caleb Harrison from the school newspaper. I have information you need to see. Can we meet tomorrow before first period? It's about Mr. Harding's pattern with female staff." Riley stared at the message, recognizing the moment when retreat became impossible. Whatever happened next, she was committed now. The quiet substitute teacher who'd hoped to keep her head down and earn her paycheck was about to discover that some fights found you regardless of how carefully you tried to avoid them. The next morning, she met Caleb in the empty newspaper office before dawn. What he showed her changed everything. 3 years of documentation. Patterns of behavior that painted Vincent Harding not as an isolated predator, but as the center of an institutional conspiracy designed to protect powerful men at the expense of vulnerable women. "Why are you showing me this?" Riley asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Because you're different," Caleb replied. "The others were scared. They wanted to keep their jobs more than they wanted justice. But yesterday, when you told him no, when you pulled away from his touch, I saw something they didn't have. What's that? Fight." 3 hours later, Riley Matthews walked into her third-period English class carrying lesson plans and a hidden truth that would either save her career or end it. Vincent Harding was about to discover that some women weren't meant to stay quiet, and that the biggest mistake a predator could make was assuming their victim wouldn't fight back. As she wrote the day's objective on the whiteboard, understanding conflict resolution in literature, Riley had no idea that, by lunchtime, she'd be living that lesson in ways she never imagined. Outside her classroom, Caleb Harrison positioned himself with a clear view through the door's window, his phone ready to record whatever happened next, because something was definitely going to happen. Vincent had requested a private conference during Riley's planning period, an unusual break from his normal pattern of casual encounters. This felt different, more urgent, more desperate, like a predator who sensed his control slipping and was ready to escalate to maintain dominance. The security camera in the hallway hummed quietly, recording everything that was about to unfold. In 3 hours, that footage would be the center of an FBI investigation. But right now, it was simply another tool in Vincent Harding's kingdom, another way for those in power to monitor and control those who might threaten their authority. Riley checked the clock, 11:47 a.m. Her planning period started in 13 minutes. She had 13 minutes to prepare for a confrontation that had been building for 20 years. 13 minutes before Vincent Harding made the worst mistake of his career. She flexed her hands unconsciously, feeling muscle memory stirring after 3 years of dormancy. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Sometimes, kiddo, the only way to stop a bully is to hit back harder than they hit you." 13 minutes and counting. At exactly 12:00 p.m. Vincent Harding entered Riley's classroom with the confidence of a man who'd never lost a battle on his own territory. He closed the door behind him with deliberate precision, the click of the lock echoing in the empty space like a judge's gavel. Outside in the hallway, Caleb Harrison pressed himself against the wall, phone positioned perfectly to capture audio through the door's glass panel. "Ms. Matthews," Vincent's voice carried the smooth authority of someone accustomed to getting his way. "I think it's time we had a more direct conversation about your future at Westfield Academy." Riley looked up from her desk, where she'd been arranging papers with practiced calm, her movements deliberate and controlled. 3 years of hiding her true nature had taught her to appear smaller than she was, less threatening than her capabilities suggested. But something had shifted since yesterday's parking lot revelation with Jessica Brooks. The careful construction of Riley Matthews, the grateful substitute teacher, was beginning to crack. "I'm always open to professional discussions, Mr. Harding," she replied, not moving from her seated position. In her peripheral vision, she noted his approach too close, too confident, blocking her path to the door with practiced precision. Vincent moved around her desk like a predator circling prey, his expensive shoes silent on the polished floor. "Professional. Yes, that's exactly what we need to discuss. You see, Riley, may I call you Riley? I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, and I'm concerned you may have misunderstood the nature of success at an institution like Westfield. He was behind her now, close enough that she could feel his presence like heat from a fire. Riley's training kicked in automatically assess threats. Identify escape routes. Prepare for escalation. The classroom door was 15 feet away. Windows faced the courtyard but were too high for emergency exit. Vincent positioned himself between her and freedom with the expertise of someone who'd choreographed this dance many times before. Success here isn't just about lesson plans and test scores, Vincent continued, his voice dropping to an intimate register that made Riley's skin crawl. It's about understanding relationships, about showing appreciation for opportunities provided by those who have the power to advance your career. Riley stood slowly, turning to face him with movements that appeared casual but were actually calculated positioning. Her father's boxing lessons had started with footwork: always maintain balance. Always control your distance. Never let an opponent dictate your positioning. Mr. Harding, I believe my teaching speaks for itself. The students are engaged. Their test scores are improving, and— The students, Vincent interrupted, stepping closer until they were separated by less than 2 feet, aren't the ones who decide your employment status. I am. His hand reached out to straighten her collar, a gesture that appeared helpful but felt like ownership. And I'm beginning to think you need a more hands-on demonstration of how things work here. The fabric of her blouse twisted in his fingers as he adjusted it unnecessarily, his knuckles brushing against her collarbone with deliberate intimacy. Riley felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that had once carried her through 3 rounds against opponents twice her size. But this time, there was nowhere to channel the energy except inward. That's inappropriate, Mr. Harding, she said quietly, her voice steady despite the warning bells screaming in her head. Please, don't touch me. Vincent's smile widened, revealing the predatory satisfaction of someone who'd just confirmed his victim's vulnerability. Inappropriate, Riley. I'm simply helping a colleague present herself professionally. Unless— His grip on her blouse tightened, pulling the fabric in a way that strained the buttons. Unless you're the type of woman who sees harassment where none exists, who creates problems for good men trying to help her succeed. The threat was crystal clear. Resist, and be labeled a troublemaker. Submit, and enable his escalation to the next level. Riley had seen this crossroads before in job interviews where qualifications mattered less than willingness to fit in performance reviews where compliance trumped competence. But this time felt different. This time, she had Jessica's evidence, Caleb's documentation, and most importantly, the bone-deep certainty that running away only gave predators permission to find new victims. Mr. Harding, Riley said, her voice carrying a new edge that Vincent was too arrogant to recognize as dangerous. I need you to let go of my clothing and step back. Instead of compliance, Vincent pulled harder, the fabric stretched, buttons straining against their threads as he used her blouse as leverage to draw her closer. What you need, he said, his breath hot against her ear, is to understand that career advancement requires certain sacrifices, cooperation, flexibility. The first button popped free with a sound like a small gunshot. Riley felt the fabric tear, felt cool air against skin that should have remained covered, felt the violation of boundaries she'd spent years learning to defend. But more than that, she felt something else stirring muscle memory from a life she'd buried 3 years ago when she'd chosen education over combat. "Ms. Matthews," Vincent whispered, his voice thick with the confidence of a man who'd never faced consequences for his actions. "I think it's time you learned what loyalty to Westfield Academy really means." He tugged harder, and another button gave way. The tearing sound seemed to echo in the silence like ripping paper, like the sound of contracts being voided and boundaries being obliterated. Riley felt the fabric separate, felt Vincent's satisfied breathing against her neck, felt the weight of 20 years of unpunished predation pressing down on her shoulders. But she also felt something else, something Vincent Harding had never encountered in his 2 decades of institutional protection and calculated intimidation. She felt the ghost of her father's voice. "Sometimes, kiddo, the only way to stop a bully is to hit back harder than they hit you." She felt the memory of her trainer's instruction: never let anyone corner you, ever. And most importantly, she felt the awakening of Riley "Lightning" Matthews, the woman who'd once made grown men tap out in under 90 seconds. Time dilated the way it always had during her fighting days. Everything slowed, while her mind processed options with crystal clarity. Vincent was bigger and stronger, but he was also untrained and overconfident. His grip on her blouse created leverage she could use against him. His forward momentum would become her weapon. His assumption of superiority would be his downfall. Riley moved with fluid precision that 3 years of hiding couldn't erase. Her left hand trapped Vincent's grabbing wrist, while her right arm snaked under his extended elbow. The leverage was perfect, his own aggressive motion providing all the force she needed to execute what her trainer had called the attitude adjuster, a textbook combination that started with control and ended with unconsciousness. The first punch, a straight right to his solar plexus, doubled Vincent over and drove all the air from his lungs. The second, a left hook to his liver, sent lightning bolts of pain through his nervous system and buckled his knees. The third, an uppercut that caught him perfectly, as his head came down, snapped his chin upward with the sound of a baseball hitting a bat. Vincent Harding, the untouchable king of Westfield Academy, crashed backward through the open classroom door and into the hallway with all the grace of a demolished building. He hit the polished floor with a wet thud that echoed off the marble walls. His expensive suit wrinkled, his perfect hair disheveled, his predatory confidence shattered along with what Riley suspected was his jaw. The silence that followed was profound. Riley stood in her doorway, blouse torn but stance perfect, fists still raised in textbook fighting position. The security camera in the corner had captured everything: Vincent's assault, her defensive response, the spectacular conclusion that sent him sprawling like discarded laundry. Holy, Caleb Harrison emerged from his hiding spot, phone still recording, eyes wide with disbelief. "Ms. Matthews, that was incredible." But Riley wasn't finished. As Vincent groaned and struggled to sit up, she knelt beside him with the calm precision of someone who'd learned that winning a fight meant more than just throwing punches. "Mr. Harding," she said quietly, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd just redefined the power dynamic permanently. "I quit, effective immediately, and I think you'll find that your 20-year career of harassment just ended about as definitively as your consciousness did." Vincent tried to speak, but his jaw wasn't cooperating. Blood trickled from his split lip as he stared up at the woman who'd just dismantled his empire with 3 perfectly placed punches. In his eyes, Riley saw something she'd never witnessed before: the recognition that some victims fight back, and that institutional protection meant nothing when justice wore boxing gloves. Within minutes, the hallway filled with teachers, students, and administrators drawn by the commotion. Jessica Brooks arrived first, taking in the scene with the satisfied expression of someone whose long-term planning had finally paid off. Margaret Sullivan appeared moments later, her face cycling through shock, calculation, and damage control as she processed the end of her carefully maintained conspiracy. "Ms. Matthews," Margaret began, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to managing crises. "I think we should discuss this privately. I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding." "Actually, Mrs. Sullivan," Caleb interrupted, holding up his phone with the confidence of someone who'd just documented the story of a lifetime. "I think the internet should decide whether there's been a misunderstanding. 47 other incidents, 3 years of evidence, and now this. Upload starts now." The video went live across every social media platform simultaneously, the carefully edited compilation of Vincent's predatory pattern culminating in his spectacular defeat. Within hours, it had reached 100,000 views. By evening, it was approaching 1 million. By the next morning, Riley Matthews had become a symbol of resistance that resonated far beyond Westfield Academy's marble walls. The FBI arrived on Tuesday. Federal investigators who'd been tracking patterns of institutional corruption across Connecticut's private school system found in Riley's case the smoking gun they'd been seeking for months. Vincent Harding was arrested on charges that included assault, harassment, and abuse of authority. Margaret Sullivan faced federal conspiracy charges for her role in covering up decades of complaints. But the most satisfying moment came 3 weeks later, when Riley received a phone call from Emma Thompson, the shy student whose victimization had started this entire chain of events. "Ms. Matthews," Emma's voice carried a strength that hadn't been there before. "I wanted to thank you, not just for stopping him, but for showing me that fighting back is possible. I've been thinking about taking self-defense classes. Do you think someone like me could learn?" Riley smiled, remembering herself at 16, scared, vulnerable, but carrying hidden strength she didn't yet recognize. "Emma, you already are learning. Every day you refuse to disappear. Every time you speak up instead of staying silent. Every moment you choose courage over comfort. That's fighting back." 6 months later, Riley Matthews stood before her permanent classroom at Jefferson High School, no longer a substitute in anyone's story. The boxing gloves on her desk weren't hidden anymore. They were a reminder that some fights are worth having, that strength comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most important lesson isn't in any textbook. Her story had sparked conversations across the nation about workplace harassment, institutional protection of predators, and the power of individual courage to create systemic change. The Riley Matthews Foundation, established with donations from supporters worldwide, now provided legal assistance and self-defense training to educators facing workplace harassment. Vincent Harding served 18 months in federal prison and lost his education license permanently. Margaret Sullivan resigned in disgrace and faced ongoing civil litigation from dozens of victims who'd found the courage to come forward. Westfield Academy implemented new policies, oversight procedures, and accountability measures that became models for institutions nationwide. But perhaps the most important change was the simplest one. Students and teachers no longer walked Westfield's halls in fear. The culture of silence that had protected predators for 20 years had been shattered by one woman's refusal to stay quiet. One 60-second decision that proved courage is contagious when someone finally decides to throw the first punch. Every teacher watching this knows that moment when you have to choose between keeping your job and keeping your dignity. Every student recognizes that feeling of watching injustice and wondering if speaking up will make things worse. Riley Matthews proved that sometimes the most important lesson isn't found in any curriculum. It's in refusing to let anyone make you smaller than you are. What would you have done in that classroom? More importantly, what will you do tomorrow when someone needs you to stand up? Because somewhere right now, another predator is counting on silence to protect them from consequences. Another victim is wondering if anyone will care enough to fight back. And another ordinary person is about to discover that heroes aren't born. They're made in moments when standing up becomes more important than staying safe. The security camera is always recording. The question is, what story will it tell about you 3 years after that October afternoon when everything changed? Riley received a letter that brought tears to her eyes. It was from a teacher in Oregon who'd watched the viral video during her darkest moment, trapped in a similar situation with an abusive administrator who seemed untouchable. "Your courage gave me permission to find my own," the letter read. "I reported him, he was fired, and now 17 other women have come forward. You didn't just save yourself that day, you saved all of us who were still fighting in silence." The letter joined hundreds of others in Riley's desk drawer, testimonies from teachers, students, and survivors who'd found strength in her story. Each one reminded her that sometimes the most powerful weapon against injustice isn't a policy or a procedure, it's one person's refusal to accept that wrong is inevitable. Riley kept her father's boxing gloves on her desk, not as symbols of violence, but as reminders that strength takes many forms. Sometimes it's throwing a punch. Sometimes it's speaking truth to power. Sometimes it's simply refusing to disappear when someone tries to erase you. Because the most dangerous thing a predator can face isn't institutional oversight or legal consequences, it's a victim who refuses to stay silent, who transforms their pain into power and their trauma into triumph. That transformation doesn't require boxing training or physical strength. It only requires the decision that enough is enough.